Guys, thank you for coming. Tonight with me I have Brian Laur. Brian Laur I've known him since probably I was a baby. I've known him for my whole life. He is a Cesar resident. He's coached many things around. He's coached a lot of basketball. You probably, if you went to any Cesar games, you've seen him coach some basketball over the years. And so now he works for Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And so I asked him to come here tonight and kind of talk about his testimony and what he does with FCA, because it's something that a job that I didn't even know existed, and I don't even know he knew existed until he took the job. And so it's something cool. It's another way of him being able to reach out and share the love of Christ to other people. And so so just to jump right in it, Brian, so kind of tell us about your testimony. And I know that we had talked before and about how, I think we've even been at some places back in the day where we both probably shouldn't have been. And so now it's cool that we're back here together and we're talking about Christ. So
absolutely. I think my testimony, again, everybody has their own individual unique testimony, and it can be super different. And I think mine's a little bit unique in that when I was first asked to give my testimony, I can tell you, Dana, my wife, and I were going to Emmanuel Baptist Church in Benton, and they had a picnic and somebody asked me to give my testimony. And I'm not good at saying no to just about anything.
Right.
Hence why I'm here tonight. No, I'm kidding. But I was unsure what I should say, first of all, at a picnic at Emmanuel Baptist Church. But the reality of it is that I grew up Catholic, which is not I don't put it in asterisk, like I grew up Catholic. I grew up very much knowing that Jesus was the focal point of our lives in my home and in my grandparents' homes and all that. But I know there can certainly be, that Catholic persuasion out there that maybe they don't always get things right. And for me, looking back at 9 years old, I had a great uncle pass away, my grandpa's brother, who we were fairly close with. He lived in a lot of different places. He was a geologist, but he was around my grandparents' home a lot, and I guess he had enough of an impact on my life. He got colon cancer at 58 years old and died from it. And when I was then asked to give my testimony years later, I was like, I didn't have what we would call the Baptist or the Protestant, I got saved at, this church camp or this or that. I had just, quite honestly, always felt like I had a relationship with Jesus. But looking back, I can say, those are bright.
I know.
I like it. I can say that when he passed away, I had some conversations with my mom specifically, and quite honestly, just with God about, I don't know where this man is, and I know that I want to go to heaven when I die. And I'm 100% confident that was Jesus was calling to me saying, hey, I'm here. I've always been here. I'm always going to be here. But that's on me to make that decision, right? And I went through some really emotional, again, as emotional as a 9-year-old. I was at the church a lot, and I helped as one of the servers, like one of the, the kids that's up there with the priest, and just had a lot of emotional experiences where that was my first, in my mind, very true spiritually formation of my faith and my walk with Jesus. Now, I would also say, as you and I talked about, maybe you alluded to, if there were some places that, 10, 12 years ago, there was drinking going on or whatever, I would without a doubt say, in my college years and beyond, I never felt like I was ignoring Jesus' call in my life, but I would also say that there was probably very little fruit going on. I wasn't denying him in any way, but I was also out doing things that I definitely shouldn't have been doing at times. So,
Right.
and again, a lot of people have those parts of their testimony as well. And when I started coaching at the high school for the last time, so as Dustin said, I've coached a ton of different sports and a lot of basketball, 5 years at Wren Lake College and 3 years at Cessors Junior High, and then a couple different stints at the high school. But I got to coach with Shane Garner, who now is an assistant athletic director at Benton. But he and I and two other guys, Justin Raby and Marcus Clary, our first year of being the coaches in 2013-14, we had another guy come on as our character coach, as our chaplain or whatever you want to call him. But it's Eric Drake is his name, and Eric lives in Tennessee now, but he was the pastor at Hazeldale Church. There's some of you here know all about this, but Eric is he's a very special.
He's a great guy. Great guy. Yep.
And he started doing I would call them devotionals, but they could have. I'm not even really sure he was talking about Jesus sometimes, but he was just talking about life. And he still has a daughter, but at the time they had just found out within the last year that she had a brain tumor, and she's now lived with that for well over a decade. But the reality is, those Saturday mornings and the time with him literally brought me back into what do I need to be doing on a daily basis? Being around the kids, obviously, you want to talk about your faith, but how do you do that? And am I living that out correctly? And a lot of times that answer is, well, at this time, yes, but how many times is it not? So that was where I would say that was now about little over 10 years ago, was the start of what I would say a transformation of really trying to become a Jesus follower every second of the day, that I still fail at constantly, but how can I go out and say yes to whatever Jesus is wanting for my life?
And be in the world and not of the world.
Exactly.
Or be of the world. Yeah.
That's what, and so that's, there's been so much in the last decade that sometimes I get confused and in my thought process of now, where was I, in my walk? And luckily, we have Facebook to look at that I can be like, I specifically remember like sitting in my house with my Bible and reading something and the Lord saying, I need you to tell people about this. And I'm like, I don't like posting anything on Facebook.
Right.
So nope, I'm not. Yep, you're going to. And like sitting there, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I have some stuff now that I look back on because I'm old and I really couldn't care less, but it shows like 2017 on this date or whatever, and I'm like, I remember doing that, but I don't remember it being that long,
right. Crazy that
close
that
to 7, 8 years ago. So I guess that's one positive of Facebook, that we can look how our walk with Jesus is being
documented.
moved.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Well, so how did you end up like knowing about FCA, and how did you like know that, hey, maybe this is something that I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah. So my very first knowledge of FCA, I had the opportunity to play basketball at SIU. So it was in 1994, 95 was my junior year. I do remember going to just an FCA event, and there was a guy, he was the only FCA person in our area. His name's Roger Lipe. He's still around, and he now works for a campus ministry called Nations of Coaches that only deals with basketball. But Roger worked for FCA for like 26 years and still lives in the Carbondale area. And I remember going to that. Quite honestly, didn't really have. I remember being there.
Right,
you know what I mean?
right.
And I don't remember going back. So
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about FCA. Probably says a whole lot more about Brian.
Right.
But so as I got into, over the years, being in sports and coaching in all kinds of different areas, I definitely knew about FCA, but I would say in 2019, Justin Raby, who I had coached with, he's from Benton, lives in Thompsonville, he asked to meet with me because he was going to talk to me about his coming on staff full-time with FCA. And so Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I know about it in a sense that I know that they, meet with coaches and stuff, and that's what I assumed we were going to talk about. And again, he and I were already really good friends, so I was probably more interested in that I'm going to be on board with whatever Justin Raby's going to do more than what Fellowship of Christian Athletes is going to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
But with that ministry, it's 100% donor-funded ministry. So you basically, when you say, yes, I will come on staff, you have to raise your whole first year's funding. It's a missionary job, just like if someone's going to another country to be a missionary for a certain time period, then they have to raise funds. And this is where until you raise your first year's funds, you're technically not on staff. And in some people's opinion, more importantly, you're not getting paid.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that was my first real experience finding out about FCA. I joined Justin's home team, you call it, giving monthly to his home team at $100 a month. And again, just being completely honest, I was like, I do a pretty poor job sometimes of tithing.
Yeah.
And that was a way for me to feel like, okay, I can consistently be giving to Jesus through Justin, through FCA. But in the end, it's really about, me and my relationship.
Absolutely. So then you kind of got involved with him, and how did the opportunity come about that you were like, hey, maybe I should be a part of this, you know?
So, again, I'm going to get my time frames wrong because I'm really old, but I've worked for FCA almost for 2 years full time, but I had a 6-month window there where there was the fundraising portion, and I had another job. I mean, that was the whole thing, but I believe it would have been December of 2022. Bob Pankey, who is another man from this area, awesome guy, he's one of the pastors at Whittington Church.
He was a football coach in Benton for a while.
10 years he was the head football coach at Benton, I believe, and had been, involved with Benton athletics forever. But he had become an FCA rep, and then was, at that time, the state director for FCA, and he's actually moved into another role that's more of in charge of like a 5-state, we call it the Midwest region within FCA. He's like the director of field ministry, so it's a huge role, and I think right now he's in Kansas at the moment. But he texted me and said, hey, I want to talk to you about something, and I didn't really know what he was going to talk about at all. But there's a role that they hadn't really had a director for Southern Illinois. So FCA has the lower 18 counties, so that goes from like Salem down to Massac County and across, that he was looking for someone to be in charge of that area because as the state director, he certainly didn't have time to do that. He's in Chicago and Decatur and Springfield and Champaign and everywhere else. And so Bob, that day we met, just over coffee, he was explaining this role to me. And I would only back up to say, interestingly enough, so after that meeting, and I can talk about that a little more, but I was talking to my sister one day, and that role is called the area director for Southern Illinois. Whatever, who cares what it's called. Mm-hmm. But my sister is a guidance counselor in Carterville, and she had been approached by somebody like a year before saying, hey, this might be something you'd be, interested in and good at, managing a staff, which is part of it, and so many other things. And she just didn't feel like it was the right, but she knew, she was like, I know exactly what you're talking about because someone asked me about that.
That's
and it
crazy.
Wasn't Bob, it was somebody else. And she just didn't feel that was something she could
Right.
could do at that time. But it took Bob and I talking weekly. I think he didn't spring the you got to raise your own funds thing on me in the first meeting.
Yeah.
But that was a process, and we met for 5 or 6 weeks. And during that time, I actually, along with my coaching, I sold sporting goods for about 7 years, a little over 7 years. Last company I worked for was East Bay Sporting Goods, just like a shoe company, and I was in all the schools in Southern Illinois already. So that's where Bob knew me, knew that I had a lot of relationships in schools and with school administrators, coaches, obviously, and it's funny how I can now see all the different things, all the different relationships that you have, and where that's kind of pointing to something different.
Right.
And I'm not even going to sit here and say, it's the penultimate of it that I'm working for FCA. I'm not going to say that. I don't plan on going anywhere else, but there's just all these things that get us towards our point of again, following Jesus better and better and better through his calling. And whether it's FCA or whatever it is, it's not about FCA.
So last week we were actually talking about God's will and what God's will is for our lives. And so when you had to make that decision, like last week we were talking about how we may be at a fork in the road, and we may have 3 or 4 different decisions to make, and it looked like you had a decision to make. How did you go about that decision? Like, did you just immediately start praying? I know you had to talk to your wife and know if it was good for you and the kids. And obviously it was probably really, really scary to step out on faith there and be able to have to, collect your own money as well for your salary.
Yeah, I definitely talked to a number of people. I mean, I always talk, and again, this is interesting because when I say I always, so the first time I made a career move was I was coaching at Wren Lake College. I was the men's assistant basketball coach and the women's volleyball coach. I worked in the fitness center, and I mean, I had a master's degree. This was the early, or maybe late 90s, early 2000s, and I worked there for 5 years and never made $20,000. So this was like nothing bad about anybody, but it was like, I don't know if this is a job or this is a hobby. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I made a move that was a very, we have horizontal and we have vertical moves. This was a very horizontal move to work at Wren Lake Golf Course. And basically they were going to pay me a little more. Dana and I would have health insurance, but I would get to play free golf. Not realizing that when you take a full-time job at a golf course, now they expect you to work from sunrise to sunset 7 days a week, and you're never going to play golf. So it's not the best. That was a horrible move, but I only say that to say, when I made that move, I can absolutely say, I think I had conversations with God, and they were very much one way. I was saying, this is what I want to do, and I don't think there was any listening going on whatsoever.
Right.
But I mean, I definitely feel like I was, this could be a good move for my family, and this and that. What do you think? Well, let's just go do it. And without a doubt, as I got older, moved from the golf business to sporting goods, my daily prayer life of listening rather than constantly asking for something or even being thankful became much more prevalent.
Well, because sales isn't an easy job either.
It's really not.
No.
It's constant. People are getting in touch with you when they can get in touch with you, which is, they think of something at 10 o'clock at night, they're going to text.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be that guy who I'm going to get with them. But it was much more, I already had a job. My kids were, I've got now a grown married daughter, a daughter that's going to be a sophomore in college, and a son that'll be a freshman next year. So 2-3 years ago, it wasn't all that much different, except that my oldest daughter's married now, and I have a kid in August.
Right.
But I knew probably within 3 or 4 times of talking to Bob that this was going to be a hard thing not to do, because God was calling me to do it, because he had been telling me for a long, long time, I'm going to ask you to do something that's hard for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I always go back to that have some crazy ideas of what I thought those things might be, but this was going to be hard for me. Doesn't mean it'd be hard for one of you. It doesn't mean it'd be hard for my daughter Delaney, or whoever. But for me to already have a job, have a lot of work to do within selling sporting goods, but I also could make my own time frame. You know what I mean? I could coach still.
Yeah.
And Bob, without a doubt, at that point, was like, if you take this job, we'd really rather you not coach. Doesn't mean you can't ever coach, but we want you to, to dive into this job and be doing it.
Right.
And we all know, like Luke Thompson, if you're coaching, you're not going to do your job very well. No, I'm kidding. but there's so that was something that I was very, very much, I knew pretty quickly, and I was honestly just so blessed. Dana was completely on board. And it was something that I think she had kind of felt coming on too, that it was just going to be something different than what we were doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So did you have like any other guys in your life or anybody else that was like there were like Christian influences that you kind of talked to about this and had people like, yeah, this is a great idea, like you needed to go do this?
Well, I mean, for the first one was Justin Raby.
Yeah.
And I honestly did not know until a little bit later, but he had been talking to Dana at a ball game when I was coaching, and because he would still come around because he was working for FCA.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, we have this job open because it's going to be his boss, and he doesn't want just anybody doing that.
Right.
Because you never know, you can get a good boss or a bad boss.
Right.
And I guess that's a good thing looking back. Now, after 2 years, he's probably more like, I don't know if I should have mentioned this, but he was all excited when he was talking about this job, and Dana actually goes, well, I don't know, that might be something Brian, and he was like, I mean, he has a job. Would he maybe want to do that? And it was just something that was a sidebar conversation. Didn't really, you know what I mean?
Right.
There wasn't much traction with it at all until Bob and him were talking later. I mean, this could have been, I don't know, a month or two later.
Right.
So anyway, that was kind of beyond what I really knew at first, but certainly talked to Justin about it. I mean, continued conversations with Bob. Shane Garner, who again is always going to be a huge influence in my life.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, I think this would be something you should do.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I kept going to people. Like, I have some friends, even now, they're borderline not following Jesus, or some of them will just flat, I mean, we have conversations. They've known where I've stood for a long time. But even some of those people that are in no way interested in following Jesus Christ were like, well, yeah, that sounds like it'd be a good job for you.
Huh.
And you know what I mean? Like, I did have my dad, who I respect more than anyone else living on this earth. His first thing he said to me was, he goes, well, you already have a job. Why don't you and you're giving money to him, just give more money to him. And I'm like, because that's not what I'm being asked to do.
Right.
And it's not Bob Pankey doing the asking.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's good. So what does your daily, what does it look like in your job? So what all do you do at your job? What would be like a daily task?
Overall, I mean, there's a couple things that I would say in general, that every day is like, there's very few days that would be like a cookie cutter same day. Now, each week, I may have one day each week that looks the same. But overall, our mission with FCA, and it's a global ministry now, but it's been in the United States since 1954. They went international in 2014. But the overall goal in Southern Illinois and throughout any FCA ministry is to bring every coach and every athlete into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ and His church. So when you say that, so our area, there's 18 counties. There's 416,000 people. Not all of them are coaches. Most of them are not athletes, but a lot of them think they are. We would classify them as athletes. Mm-hmm. And so there is a huge number of people out there that there's the three things within FCA going beyond that mission is that we want to engage with every coach and every athlete in our area, okay? And right now we have 3 full-time, we call them area reps, that I work with, and they work in specific counties. So Justin, that we've talked about, he's in charge of Hamilton, Perry, and Franklin counties. We have another area rep who would be in Jefferson, Washington, and Marion County, which Marion County is actually Centralia, Salem. His name's Britt Fullerton. They've both been on staff over a couple of years longer than me.
Yeah.
And then when I came on staff, I hired another area rep whose name's Austin Dixon. He is in Williamson and Saline counties. Williamson County, obviously, one of the bigger, more populated areas around. So when you say, what do we do? Our main job is to go out, engage with coaches, first of all, because the coaches are the ones who are around the athletes. I mean, one coach could be influencing, one football coach in Southern Illinois could be influencing easily 100 kids in some of our bigger schools. And even the smaller schools that have football, you're talking 40, 50 kids who are actually playing on the team. That's not including other coaches, managers, cheerleaders, other students in the school that look up to that football coach. So we want to engage with coaches. If initially you'd say, well, if they don't have faith, okay, well, that may be something that we're going to talk to them about, but they're not going to be the one that we're immediately going, hey, we want you to go out and talk about Jesus with your kids.
Right,
you know what I mean?
right.
Because they don't know anything about that.
Right, right.
So a lot of what we're doing is engaging with coaches who we know are men and women, certainly women too, of faith in Jesus, and then we're going to help come alongside them. And because I can say, as a coach, I definitely had experiences where I'm like, I want to talk to these kids more about Jesus, but other than like praying with them before a game, there's boundaries. Well, do I just go, just do it? You know what I mean? And we have all kinds of different resources, all kinds of different ways that we can engage with kids as well. But really, it's going to the heart of the coaches and saying, if you're living your life for Jesus and doing it well, kids are going to know about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we always talk about within FCA, a lot of people don't remember, a lot of certain things in their life, but they remember who their first baseball coach was or who their first football coach was, and they remember, was this a coach that was, just transacting? You know what I mean? Were they just there to use you to try to win games or win track meets or win football games, whatever it is?
Yeah.
Or were they very much trying to transform you into being hopefully at the very least, a better person? But for us, we're pushing the envelope. Hey, make them disciple makers themselves.
Yeah.
And that's really where we go with it is, so we engage, then we equip those who are faithful followers in ways that they can then go out and you go engage, equip, and empower then their athletes or their assistant coaches or other coaches within their circle of friends. There's conference meetings going on all the time with different coaches from different schools, and you develop those relationships. Well, asking somebody to be in a Bible study with you can be a really hard thing to do.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's what we come alongside and say, hey, coaches at this school, let's have a Bible study. When's a good time for you guys? Is it 7 in the morning or 5:30 at night? And we try to have as many of those types of things going on. A lot of times it may just be a one-on-one type, scenario.
Yeah.
But as many of those opportunities as we can have going is what we have going in Southern Illinois. And knowing that our staff, my staff, I call it our because it's just the 4 of us, but in Southern Illinois, there are 10 counties that technically are unstaffed, so that's where I am the majority of the time. But if you asked FCA, the higher-ups, they would say my main job is to hire more staff. You know what I mean? Which is, again, I've hired one staff member, but it's a process.
Right.
And we'd love to have like a full-time and even part-time ministry is certainly an option. Having a female on staff would be a huge
And guys, I didn't ask. I just wanted to say this. Like, I didn't ask Brian here for you guys to be like. He's not recruiting for FCA. He's not asking for anything today. I just wanted to bring him here to show everybody like you can be a missionary right here. You can do things and spread the word of God and doing multiple different things. And this is another job that I didn't even know existed a couple years ago. And he's doing it and doing a phenomenal job. And so when you're going through all these Bible studies and you're talking to all these kids, I mean, I'm sure that there's been some awesome moments that you have seen. So I just kind of want to talk about like some of the fruit that you have seen through this job already.
So just to talk about fruit, and again, numbers don't necessarily mean much because a church can have, I mean, there are a lot of churches can have 3,000, 5,000, 50,000 people going there, and a lot of people can be put off by that church and what they're being taught, right?
Right.
I mean, that can be a problem.
Absolutely.
So it's really not necessarily about numbers, but I would say, so our schools, our high schools and junior highs, just to give you an example, we have huddles, which are weekly or sometimes every other week, devotionals. We want them to be student-led as much as possible in junior highs. That's a little harder to get that done. And in some schools, we have very faithful huddle leaders, teachers, and coaches who they want to lead. But really, our job is to say, you need to give this away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so 2 years ago in Southern Illinois, in 2022, we had 45 active huddles going on. And at the end of 2023, we were from 45 to 79.
Wow.
So it's grown because...
And those are just groups in the school, correct?
Yeah,
That's what huddles are.
They're certified. They have technically a huddle leader who has filled out a ministry leader application.
Is that a student or is that someone from the faculty?
A teacher or a faculty member.
Okay.
Because for legal reasons, you want to have someone who you say, this person's filled out this statement of faith and they're not off in the weeds either.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
again, they could tell us something that's not true,
Right.
but we're going to, part of our jobs also is to do background checks.
Right.
So anyway, just going back to fruit, that's just a general thing of it is growing in Southern Illinois. There's all kinds of ministry happening. But I think like one of my favorite stories, I was at Massac County. They asked me to come speak at their junior high huddle. And when you go to some of these, some of you have taught, or at the very least been in Sunday school classes, right? And you can ask questions, very open-ended questions. They're not yes, no, and you get kind of the look most of you are giving right now, But it's one of those things where I went into Massac County expecting, I knew that he's the guy who's the huddle leader, Mike Logeman, said, talk as long as you want. And I was like, well, no, I mean, you probably only got a specific number. He was like, no, we do this for an hour and a half every other Wednesday. The school does not have practices on Wednesdays, like the coaches know not to have practices from 3:30 to 5. It's FCA time.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's a little different, because most schools are trying to put that into that 20, 30-minute time period sometime in the day. And one interesting thing that, again, this is, a more general one, but I go in there, and there were around 60 junior high kids. They had 2 junior high leaders that day, before I spoke, got up and basically gave a Bible study. And when I got up, and I had a set thing I was going to talk about, but I was like, okay, can someone read, whatever scripture it was? I had like 15 kids raising their hand wanting to do that.
Wow.
And I only say that to say, this had nothing to do with me. It had something to do with FCA because Mike Logeman has been running that huddle along with another 2 other staff members for he can't even remember. That's what I love about him. He's like, I don't know, 12, 15 years. But they've been doing this, and those kids have been taught by other kids year after year. Be engaged. We're doing this for the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And again, it's really not even about FCA either. It's Jesus is working in that school in a way that is absolutely amazing. And I've gotten to see that over and over and over. But that's a a really special one to me.
Yeah.
Because it was not only a lot of kids, but they were like all about sharing the gospel with each other. And what is that going to do over the next decade,
Yeah.
over the next 20 years, over the next 30 years? So one other thing that's close to me is, and I won't name his name, but we have a high school basketball coach who I sold sporting goods to a few years ago. And to be quite honest, some of those conversations, he was pretty brass. Is that the word? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like his language, it wasn't being mean. He was just talking like he was a coal miner and he's a high school basketball coach. You know what I mean? And I was like, interesting. Okay. But I guess it made an impression on me more than
Right.
what I don't really you do what you're doing. You know
Right,
what I mean?
right.
But anyway, that was like 2022, like in the summer of 2022, before Bob and I talked in December. So within the last 2 years, he is in a school that one of our area reps is now in with him. He invites him to practices all the time. They have a relationship.
Awesome.
And he started going to church. I'm not, again, like I kind of said earlier, I don't know that he's been saved yet, but
He's still there. Yeah.
but he's being engaged.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I mean? And he is
yeah.
on a trajectory that's that I know was not. And like I've even seen him share on Facebook, like that this was last summer, one of his players got saved and baptized. And he like shared it on Facebook and was all excited.
That's awesome.
So it's like, this is the stuff.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
That we're looking for. And that kind of stuff is happening all over the country through FCA. And again, the main thing is realizing, because I want to make sure I'm consistent with this, FCA is a parachurch organization. That means we come alongside the church. We're not trying to be the church, but realize there are a lot of kids out there that they don't have even somebody dragging them to church. They don't have anybody at home telling them anything except those words that coach was using with me. They don't know anything about Jesus except probably what they see on these phones, and if they're looking at the wrong things, then they'll get a message that it's ridiculous and it's all made up, right? So FCA can be the beginning of bringing somebody to faith, but then our job also is we want to get them into a Bible-based church.
Yeah.
And there's, again, all kinds of those throughout Southern Illinois that I'm just amazed. Getting to go talk at different ones and then getting to be a part of the services, I'm like, this is
awesome. And I think that's great news because nowadays, we live in a world where it's not getting any better, and
Right.
so all we hear is bad news all the time. We hear on social media like, oh, I wouldn't want to have a kid this day because it's horrible out here. And so to hear that, to be able, no, there is some, people doing good in the world and growing the kids to the kingdom of God is great.
And that's exactly, I would not want to sit here and say, if it weren't true of my experiences so far, and realize we're in Southern Illinois. Like, I talk with people from Chicago, at least on a weekly basis, talking about like what I do each week. I'm on it's a Teams call, a Zoom call with a group for an hour and a half every Monday morning, the Illinois leadership team. And some of those experiences can be different in larger areas. But I would even say like Murfreesboro High School, their huddle leader has told me specifically, they have to be student-led. When that high school has their huddle, at whatever time it is each week, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but her and the other huddle leader, she and he both, there's a camera on, and if they say anything, then the school administration has said, this is not going to happen.
Wow.
It has to be student-led.
Yeah.
And that is technically a legal thing, but in Southern Illinois, we're not fighting that a whole lot.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right.
But other
Which
parts
is great,
of the country
yeah.
are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where FCA has, I know this is absolute fact too, that they've been sued over and over, but they've never, to this date at the very least, they've never lost a court case.
Wow.
So
That's
again,
awesome.
we have the First Amendment on our side. as well.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate you coming. And guys, I hope you got something out of this tonight. It just shows that, God is moving in all different places and all different things in different ways. And so I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming, and hope you guys come next week. Appreciate it. Thanks.